Okay, so our first speaker in this session is Glenn Laird, and he is a landscape architect and planner with Harris County Flood Control District. I'm picturing the letters in my mind, and I'm like, okay, what do they stand for? Anyway, so his bio is in your packet, and because we're trying to give him plenty of time to speak, I will not go into a big, huge thing. So come on up, Glenn.
Thank you, Diana. Okay, good afternoon. Now, this is the absolute worst time. We've had really great presentations, and it's after lunch, and it's getting warm in the room. So if I hear snoring, I won't be offended. Okay, let me make sure I got all of what I need to do this. I'm going to be talking today about what the district's role has been in preservation and restoration of the Houston region's green fabric. And so let's go right to it. No one can make a presentation like this anywhere without Mike Talbot saying, "You will remind them of our mission." And so we will do that. Here we will recite the creed to provide flood damage reduction projects that work. That is job one, with appropriate regard for community and natural values. Well, it's that last part that sort of creates a challenge for us sometimes, because there are so many communities within the community. Figuring out, who all do we listen to? And we try to listen to everyone. But, you do get the type of person that is going to weigh in on what you do, and they unfortunately sometimes look like this. I've always wanted a place unspoiled by man, except us, of course. The last one in wants to raise the gate, right? And don't mess with it now that I'm here. At any rate, first, let's start at the very beginning, a very good place to start. Sound of music, of course. But any story has always got to have a prequel. And you've actually seen a bit of the prequel this morning, and it had to do with the original parks plan, which was really kind of more than a parks plan. It was really kind of a city plan, cleverly disguised as a parks plan by Alfred C. Comey a little over 100 years ago. And in that, he said the bayous are the one natural thing of any interest that Houston has going on for itself. We don't have a lakefront like Chicago. We don't have the bay and the ocean like San Francisco. We got the bayous. It's what we got. We work with it. All right. He said, make it the key framework of a parks and open space network. And he also mentioned in there one of the side benefits was flood prevention. If people aren't building right down to the stream, then flood damages are reduced. So keep that in mind as we move forward. So in the beginning for us, what we had was we were created by an act of the legislature in 1937. It was the result of a couple of major floods in Houston that whacked downtown in both 1929 and 35. And in the case of the 35 flood, it also did a lot of damage to the Houston ship channel. And that sort of was the final straw. So local city fathers went to the legislature in 37, got them to create us. Our primary purpose in that creation was to be a local partner for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Previous year in 36, Congress finally got enough chutzpah to say, yeah, we can get involved, the federal government, in local flood control projects if they're associated with streams that are part of commerce and therefore are part of interstate commerce and are covered under the Interstate Commerce Clause. And so now the Corps can do these things, but only if there's a local entity that they can partner with that tells them what the problems are, and they work together to come up with solutions. So that's how we came to be. And no, we are not technically a piece of Harris County government. We are a separate political subdivision of the state of Texas. It's just because they decided to make whoever was sitting as the Commissioners Court of Harris County our board of directors, it has been confusing ever since. But nonetheless, believe it or not, we are a separate entity. Well, we have some interesting other purposes besides just partnering up with the Corps, which we've done a lot of over the years. And a whole bunch of things were listed out in the legislation: the storing, preservation, and distribution of the storm and flood waters. I'd like to know what distribution of storm and flood waters, what they meant by it. But at any rate, for domestic municipal flood control, irrigation, and other useful purposes. We've never been called on to do any of those, I might add. Not really, other than, somehow maybe storing some of the floodwaters for a bit. But then there's one other really interesting little clause in that description: the conservation of forests. Keep that one in mind, too, as we move forward. Well, we haven't been standing still since 1937. We have been doing all kinds of things, and along the way, we have evolved. Okay, it's not your granddaddy's flood control district anymore. Now, where we've been in terms of channels, I'll just, throw a couple things out to give you a rough idea. Yes, that's the past. That's where we've been. For those of you that think that we concrete lined Buffalo Bayou and White Oak Bayou, no, that was actually done by the Corps of Engineers. That was those were Corps-led projects. And I'll let everyone know that we actually made it better than it was going to be. Take a look. All right, you see what you're seeing there? You got concrete about a third of the way up the slope. The original Corps plan would have made those two streams look like the Los Angeles River. It would have been concrete all the way to the top. And we said, au contraire, people of Houston will not accept that. And so this was the compromise, actually. So it could have been worse. All right. Now this is where we're headed. We're moving in the direction of employing a sort of design with nature to draw from Ian McCarg, except that was for a whole other thing. But using fluvial geomorphological processes, say that 10 times very fast, in the design of our channels moving forward from where we are today. This is actually the upper end of Mason Creek out near Katy. And we did this on purpose. And it conveys, it's a wider channel than we in the old days would have come up with, but it's a fully functioning natural stream segment. And the same thing has happened with detention basins. Now, we actually didn't start detention basins until 1980. We decided that we're tired of channelizing channels, and if we can just store a lot of water, we won't have to make the channels wider, deeper, and more trapezoidal. So we started doing that right after 1980, and they were things of beauty, I will assure you, in the mind of an engineer. You see nothing almost but straight lines there. We have everything mimics the outline of the property, and you've got these nice little concrete low-flow channels to collect the water and exit out of the basin. Beautiful. Well, this is what we're doing. This is more like what we're doing today. This is along Armand Bayou, just upstream of Fairmont Parkway. And you'll see that the bayou still exists down the middle of this thing. And we actually let the water spill out on the upstream side into a series of sinuous lakes that are designed to clean up the storm water and then go back into the stream further down. Wet bottom basins. We're doing it for a number of reasons. If you have a dry bottom, you have to slope it so it'll drain, so you can mow it, right? You lose a wedge there in terms of storage capacity. You make it a lake, storage capacity goes all the way across it everywhere. And guess what? You can't mow it. So we just saved ourselves burning an awful lot of fuel doing mowing by doing this kind of a basin. All right, so let's get to the expanding the green fabric. Now, number one, I want to talk about our floodplain acquisition and preservation program. Remember that bit about the conservation of forests? Now it shows up. And here's how it fits in. This is our little triangle of what we do with our capital improvements program. And it's 9 basic sub-programs that we have in the overall CP, and it's kind of how we spend our money. And the foundation of it, you will note, has to do with federal dollars. Okay, one is the flood damage reduction, federal flood damage reduction projects. In other words, the Corps of Engineers, either they lead it or we lead it. It's a joint project, and they give us anywhere from 50 to 75% of the cost, depending on a number of factors, that enable us to do some major projects around the county. And then also, over the last 20 years or so, we've gotten into the business of buying out regularly flood damaged properties. And that is our mitigation grants. Well, if you keep going on up the pyramid up near the top, on what would be your left, I think. Is it on the left? Yes. Floodplain acquisition and preservation. And what is that? Well, what we do, and like I said, it's been over about the last 20 years, we buy property. Voluntary sellers only. We do not condemn for this part of it. And part of it is just to be frugal with our money, because any time that you say, well, we're going to have to condemn you, the lawyers show up, and the next thing you know, we're paying 5 times as much as it's actually worth. It has to be undeveloped properties, which if it's a riparian area around here, it's probably forested, and almost everything we have acquired this way has been riparian forest. It's deep in the floodplain. So it would be possible for somebody to come in and develop these properties. I won't get into the mechanics of that, but it is actually technically and legally possible to develop in the floodway if you do certain things. All right, so by us acquiring these properties, it will never happen to those properties. A lot of what we have done turns out ends up being supportive of projects that the county precincts have. And that is the biggies are, and they both happen to be in Precinct 4. The Spring Creek Greenway, we've bought approximately 500 acres over the years as a part of that. The Cypress Creek Greenway, we've bought approximately the same number of acres. 140 acres in various places along Greens Bayou, and currently about 50 acres on Clear Creek. Well, that's one way that we're doing it. Now, the other way, and this has been very effective over the years. Oh, and by the way, the thing about the acquisition of all those lands, it does not those acreages I gave you do not include the over 2,600 residential lots that we have acquired with all those FEMA grants. The acquisition of those, the removal of the structures, the removal of all of the impervious cover on the site, we have basically undeveloped a full square mile of the Houston area with that program alone. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the process. I'm going to talk about and show you some examples of this. Okay, there's Harris County. That's the network of channels, both natural, about 800 miles worth of natural channels of various, everything from rivers to major bayous to little bitty tributaries, and then double that amount of man-made ditches. Okay, so that's the total network of channels. And the green little shapes you see in there are our detention basins that we have thus far developed. These are the things that we bring to the table in the partnerships. So here they are. what do we got? Like I said, 800 miles of natural channels, 1,700 miles of man-made channels, but only roughly a third of all of that do we own in fee. A large part of the rest of it we have easement over, and some of it we got no rights to at all. And some of the places that we have no rights to it at all would shock people, because it's usually the lower parts of the natural streams where we have no right of way. But at any rate, 8,844 acres that we own in fee in channels. We've got almost that many acres in 98 detention basins. And compare that, 445 acres in Herman Park, 1,466 acres in Memorial Park. So we've got several of those slammed together that could still be developed within our basins. And we do it through what we've called multi-objective partnering. And we do that with Harris County precincts, local municipalities, municipal utility districts, management districts, tax increment reinvestment zones. And how do we do that? We have to have fee title, first of all. You know, we can't let anybody put a recreational thing, including a trail, on our easement. Only the underlying fee owner can give that permission. So if we got fee title to it, we can start dealing immediately. Otherwise, we can tell you, you got to do this in terms of the design, but you got to get permission from the real underlying fee owner before you can put a trail on it. Do the development of master plans, whether it's by us or by our partners or us jointly, and the development of site plans, and again, the same way. And then we have to enter into what's called an interlocal agreement. Under the laws of the state of Texas, two public entities, or a public entity and a quasi-public entity, can enter into these agreements whereby the roles and responsibilities of each of the partners is laid out in excruciating detail, and who does what, when, where, and with whom. And the lawyers have to be the ones that are the most satisfied with what comes out of it. So, recreational projects along channels, on our feet, 162 miles of hike and bike trail systems, regional and local, in place as of right now. And the Bayou Greenways Initiative, which you've already heard about, Tom Bacon, is a big part of it and growing, needless to say. And the detention basins, we show you places where we've got sports fields, picnic areas, playgrounds, fishing lakes, nature trails, and all of this covering about 2,232 acres. That in itself, more than Memorial and Herman Park put together. And we're not done yet. So, just some examples of where. Along the channels with the precincts, Spring Creek Greenway, Cypress Creek Greenway, stuff on Mason Creek, Brays Bayou, and Buffalo Bayou. With the City of Houston, Brays Bayou, White Oak Bayou, Sims Bayou, and Buffalo Bayou. In the detention basins, Harris County precincts, Gene Green Park, Arthur Story Park, Terry Hershey Park, Cypress Park are just some examples. There are more, actually. City of Houston, Keith Wise Park, Willow Water Hole, Shady Lane Park, Mary Withers Park. And we'll go through a few of them very quickly. The green dots you see on the map are projects with the county precincts, and the purple ones are the ones with the City of Houston. So I'll start with Gene Green over in Precinct 2. It's along Carpenter's Bayou. If you look at the map, Carpenter's Bayou is up at the north. Somewhere just off the picture down here is the East Beltway, and the north edge of the property over there is the new alignment of Highway 90A. And this is broken into basically several pieces, some of which is to be restored into sort of natural things with wetlands and ponds, forests, and the other part of it in sports fields. And to give you an idea of this is not too long after it was completed. You can see the central facilities that are up on the top. They're not down in the bottom where it gets wet. And the down in the wet, now up on the top also, Precinct threw in a nice little LID green infrastructure feature in there in the parking lot. But then you have ball fields slightly elevated above the lowest parts of the basin, and tennis courts and other things, in fact. Moving on, we're going to go to Arthur Story Park, which is with Precinct 3. At the top of this is Bel-Air Boulevard. Over on the right-hand side is going to be the West Beltway 8, and Brays Bayou goes sneaking through it there. And you've got a park at the heart of it, up on the high ground that was preserved, some old riparian forests that we preserved. And then you've got two wet bottom basins, one on either side. And the very first basin that was put in was one of those wonderful looking engineering things as a dry bottom basin with three nice little parallel concrete bottom drainage ways to drain the bottom of it. And this is what it looks like from the air, looking sort of towards the northwest. Down on the bottom, this thing's got a little pointer, doesn't it, right? Let's see if I hit the right button. Okay, this is the area right here that is above, well, is on natural undisturbed ground. And the old original channel meandered its way through here approximately there. And then we've got areas here that we were creating habitat and shallow places along the edges. And right over here is the weir. The weir is that low area that when the water starts coming up in the bayou, it spills over the top of it to go into the basin. And on that particular location, the weir looks like that. Biking, hiking, skateboarding, and we've even put some native vegetation there. Oh, and by the way, just as a quick aside, every time we do one of these basins, we come in and in many of them we reforest them. Some cases, well, where they're wet bottoms, we introduce a lot of wetland vegetation into them. And we only use native plant materials, and our program for this puts anywhere from 25 to 35,000 native trees and shrubs in the ground every year. And again, it's a park that's also tied to the neighborhood, which is a very largely Asian neighborhood. And that is an expansion of the old channel into the duck pond in the middle of the park. You have picnicking, places for families to stroll, little playgrounds and so forth. So it's kind of an all kinds of things park going on there. Well, we'll move on to a different kind of park, also in Precinct 3, Terry Hershey Park. A lot of you are probably very familiar with it. We have linear detention on the north side of the Buffalo Bayou Channel through the area from just outside Beltway 8 back out in the direction of Highway 6. And that's what it looks like from the air looking west. This is what it looks like on the ground. And you can see the bayou and its riparian fringe is on the far left over there out of sight. Trail along there, and then meadows, open meadows that are lower than the trail. That all of that goes underwater in big events. We'll move on to one more time in Precinct 3. If you hadn't noticed, Precinct 3 really likes to do parks with us. And most of the time on our property, but in this case it was actually, we did a detention basin in their property. And this location, Cypress Park, is, here we've got Cypress Creek. It's flowing in that direction. And that's also it. It kind of goes out here somewhere. And Little Cypress Creek is running into it like at about that location. And so the master plan for this was to excavate this detention basin, and the weir is at this location, so as the water comes up, it spills in, fills the lake above its normal lake level, and then is metered out in the pipe right here. And this is what it looks like from the air looking west. You can see Cypress Creek there. And what we want to point out, this is, you get a choice between this is a detention basin or that is a detention basin. Which do you want? That's the developer's detention basin for over here, and this is our detention basin. So. Now we're going to switch City of Houston. How am I doing for time?
You've got
5 minutes. Okay, Keith Wise Park. This is a City of Houston park, and we worked with the city, with HPARD, and with the donor families to come up with something acceptable to everyone, to actually insert a 111-acre detention basin complex within the park. This will ultimately be Gulf Mine Road going through here. That's all in Westfield. This is the park that mostly exists. Now this is the portions of the park that have been added as a result of it, and you get to buy a really nice little bridge over Hall's Bayou. That's what it looks like from the air. We dug the hole, we did the vegetation, and the city came in and put in the trails and the boardwalks. And that partnership results in something that looks like this. A lot of good habitat, a lot of good water quality. Willow Water Hole, this is our roughly 300-acre basin complex, South Post Oak and South Main. The Willow Water Hole is a tributary of Brays Bayou. It's part of Project Brays. And as you can see from this, lots of wet bottoms. We had 27 acres of wetlands that we impacted on this site, and they are being replaced with wetlands that we are putting in the bottoms, and we are putting thousands of trees, native trees and shrubs in as we go. And once we finish each cell, Houston Parks and Recreation Department begins to take over and put park features, trails, et cetera, in here. And they take over the maintenance of all of that, and we just maintain what controls flooding. And so this is what it looks like. You can see the wetland plantings in what's called compartment 2 there, which is part of the mitigation, and some of the tree plantings that had just been done. Now, let's talk about a channel. I'm going to use one channel because I haven't got much time. Buffalo Bayou Park. The stream restored is an integral component of a park restored. The on-again, off-again park, Comey pointed it out as something to have in his 1913 plan. Initially, the city took that to heart, and between 1914 and 1920 acquired almost all of the acreage for it. Then Allen and Memorial Parkways got shoved through the edges of it between 1945 and 1956. And then we came in and did a channelization project in 57. There was a little bit of now and again, on again, off again, trail features put in over the last 4 decades of the 20th century. And any rate, so about then, this was 57. This is what we did in 57. We don't tout this very much, but it showed up in the Houston Chronicle as the Woodcutter's Ball. And it looked like this. This is what happened all the way from Sabine to Shepherd. And this was the good old days of flood control, whatever that means. Remember what that looked like. But at any rate, a new grand vision comes along. Buffalo Bayou Partnership leads the charge. They put together an environmental advisory committee and a big partnership, which included Kinder, us, the city of Houston, and a whole bunch of other civic groups. Got community input to Too bad Ms. Blue's not here. Yes, we did ask the citizens. Master plan was released in January of 2012, and it's a balance of natural systems and recreation. So the grand vision continuing. Construction began August 2012. We were the first ones in, and that was to restore 2 miles of the bayou's channel using natural channel design principles. So what we did was basically go in and kind of semi-undo what we did in 57 to make it more natural, less old-fashioned heavy engineering. Well, the park now contains, as you know, miles of trails, bridges, paddling opportunities, playgrounds, dog park, lovely when it comes to water quality discussions, gardens, sculptures, lawns, forests, and more. And it opened early this month. So, let's talk about, I've already said what we did, and this is what it looks like more recently. Big difference between the woodcutter's ball and this picture. So, just one last little thing in terms of partnerships and things that we're doing. This is my Dear Restore Act Santa letter. It's not just my letter, but it actually is Flood Control District, Precinct 2, Armand Bayou Nature Center, the City of Pasadena, the Conservation Fund, Texas Conservation Corps, and others want a big project for Christmas, or Christmases to come for about 15 years of funding, hopefully. What we want is 1,300 acres of coastal flatwoods and prairies to preserve and restore, most of which is floodplain, and that's our hook. Remember, we buy up floodplain land to preserve it, right? Keep it from, ExxonMobil is actually looking to sell the property. We are in conversation with them, deep in conversation with them. They were originally thinking about selling it to whoever showed up to buy it. Once they get it's an old oil field, by the way. And once they get everything all cleaned up, and we came in and said, we'll do something. We'll give you some good PR. We'll let you get a tax break, okay? And if we do this right, you don't have to do all that cleanup, because if we just avoid touching the 44 old well sites, Railroad Commission will be fine with that. You don't have to spend millions of dollars doing it. So yes, we have their attention. We are in negotiations. Any rate, so what we also want is a shiny new nature learning center for Armand Bayou Nature Center, over 2 miles of paddle trail extension, park facility expansions, and 2 of our what we want to be wet bottom detention basins constructed. Not much, $50 million, say it fast enough. It's no big deal. But citizens and their input. Everything I've told you is what big organizations get together. Public-private partnerships, public-public partnerships, But what, sometimes it's a little tough for us to really understand what it is that the public wants, what the citizenry wants. And so sometimes their creativity and their initiative will produce things in our channels. Now, what you see here is a guy who's got, as you can see, this is kind of down on the bottom of the slope, and he's got a golf cart. And you'll notice one of the back wheels is not quite looking like a wheel, looks more like a pulley. Well, here's the other end of what the pulley is attached to. Okay, so sometimes you can advance the cause of recreation and open space with us without us even knowing it, with that sort of creativity. The major takeaways, things that I want to say about what this is really all about. Think outside of the box. Get creative. Don't do it the way we've always done it. You can do flood control and one way, be visionary. Make no small plans. Think big. If you think little, you get little. And partner up, because the whole is always greater than the sum of the parts. and ante up. You get what you pay for. Any questions? Have we got time for questions, or should I run?
You were going to elaborate on the conservation of forest clause in the charter.
Well, see, by all of the purchase of all of those forested lands along the bayou, that's fulfilling what we were allowed to do.
Why do you think it was included in the first place?
Don't know. We've done research on what was put together to take to the legislature, and we haven't been able to find enough, particularly of what happened after we got there. Because, you know, if you take a bill, an idea to a body like the legislature, and you tell them what you want, they always got to put their fingerprints on it. We don't know where that conserved forest things came from. We really don't. But we take it to mean that when we get an opportunity, and it works for what we have to do, first of all, that the acquisition of these properties is our way of conserving those forests, because we take them out of the ability to be developed.
But don't you take down a lot of forest to build your detention basin?
But we come right back in and plant. Okay? To have an omelet, you have to break some eggs. The reality of life. A detention basin, you know, I've been asked many times, well, if you just leave this wetland alone, okay, it serves to hold floodwaters. It helps reduce flooding. Well, yeah, but if we've got a site that's 100 acres, and we have 10 acres of wetlands on it that are 18 inches deep, okay? You can do the math on exactly how many acre feet of storage you get in it. If we have to leave it alone, that's all you got. You already had it already. We come in, we get a permit, we remove that, we dig the whole thing down, and we replace the wetlands with even more wetlands in the bottom. It's a win-win situation, because we now have 50 times as much storage to help reduce flooding, and we still end up with the wetlands, and we still end up with forest. That's the way we approach this. But we have, number one, we're not charged with being a conservation entity. We are charged with getting the flooding reduced in Harris County. But we do all of these other things at the same time, because we want to do it. Okay?
So you spoke about the fact that the flood control district only owns by fee about a third of the land that you want, I guess, or that you.
Yeah, well, I mean, we got a lot of easement, so we're able to maintain and do what we need to otherwise. It's just that we then don't have the ability to partner with people for recreational or other purposes unless we own it too.
Since you're not a part of Harris County exactly, you did talk about you could get tax incentive, maybe tax on or whatever. Could you potentially do that for a private developer that would be willing to maybe purchase a piece of property that's on one of your waterways, and then give up a portion of that land as either a conservation easement or fee simple ownership, maybe a tax incentive or something like that for that developer to come in?
I don't think we could do that per se. You know, we don't control the taxing thing.
Right.
But the thing about the taxes that I mentioned with the ExxonMobil deal, that has to do with if they sell us the land for a lot less than market value, they get a tax write-off. And that's the way that would work for that. Okay?
Thank you.
Again, getting creative.
Absolutely.
That Exxon project is down in Almond Bayou, right?
Yes, it's Armand Bayou. I don't think we would have partnered with the Armand Bayou Nature Center to do something on, you know, some other place. Yeah, it is Armand Bayou. This is the area that the original Audubon Hannah Ginsberg plan was going to take it all the way up to Genoa Red Bluff Road, but the oil field was still there in the early 70s, so they just had to stop. Now that they've closed the oil field and plugged and abandoned all the wells, we have the opportunity to do it. And our little team is going for it.
that you showed at the first part of your presentation.
Mm-hmm.
Up towards the top, there was a category for frontier projects.
Yeah.
Could you kind of expand on that, or an example of what one of those might be?
Okay, Frontier Project is a new way of doing channels, because most of the channels we've had to deal with in our history have been in areas that have already been developed. So we're very limited in our right-of-way, and so what we can do with it is somewhat constrained. The frontier is those areas out in the west, northwest, and eastern parts of the county that haven't been developed yet, and we've developed an approach which is, in the old days, we'd ask for 160 feet, we'd do a trapezoid, walk away from it and just start mowing it. But what we are doing in those, and we're beginning to do one on Upper Langham Creek, is to create a channel that is based on everything that would drive what that channel would be like as what you'd call a low flow channel. Create a geomorphic floodplain next to it that when the water comes up, about a 2-year event, it begins to spill over, dissipates the energy of the channel. Broad one, and then flat slopes going up. So we might be talking about 450 feet instead of 160 feet. And we vegetate along the channel like that little piece I said was Upper Mason. That's what the frontier thing is all about.
Out in the hinterlands where land is still cheap.
So if you want to see that in reality, go out to Cross Creek. Go out to Cross Creek Ranch near almost Fulshire. And that's our design put on the ground out there. Okay, so.
Cool. So yeah, they're getting going with the next presentation in the other room.
Yeah,
and
we need to move on.
we'll get going here. Thank you, everyone.